This week, Kawasaki announced a significant update to their Z900 Naked, and so here we go with the 12 key things that you need to know about it. Now I'll start with the engine, and it's largely the same for the new model year, with it still being an inline-4 with 948 cc's of capacity, but they do say there are new cam profiles, and that in itself has a number of different outcomes. Now one would assume they're a little bit less aggressive or lower lift, because peak power is down by a horsepower and peak torque down by a newton meter. Still, 122 horses peak is plenty enough, and on the upside they do say there's a 16% improvement in fuel economy. They also say there's more torque at lower revs, which isn't necessarily reflected in those peak figures, and so that could give you a bike that feels a lot more usable in terms of low-end grunt and mid-range. Ultimately, I think this update comes down to the fact that we've got stricter Euro 5 Plus or 5B emissions regulations coming into play very soon. And so look, they had to clean it up to keep it on sale. And to be fair, they haven't really sacrificed much in the way of performance. Thing is though, it does seem like they've put a lot of effort into improving the electronics package. And while I'll have to wait to ride one to see whether they've done the trick, it does seem like it could lead to a substantially better bike to ride. Now, one of those is the fact that it now gets electronic throttle valves. And one of the things I didn't particularly love about the previous generation was the fact that it was really quite choppy on and off the throttle. So perhaps this will give it a little more refinement in that regard. And so hopefully it does go some way to smooth it out. It's also the first time that this bike has had an inertial measurement unit. And so that means that lean angles are now fed into the bike, which means the 3-mode traction control system is now corner insensitive. So this should mean that it intervenes a bit more keenly when the bike is banked over, where braking traction with the rear wheel would have higher stakes. Now, perhaps more day-to-day useful though is the fact that you get cruise control fitted as standard for 2025, and while I know some people aren't particularly bothered about it, for me it's a big help when you do have to tackle some of those motorway stints. On top of that, another potentially handy feature is the fact the 5-inch TFT display now has the capability to show turn-by-turn navigation, providing you hook it up to your phone and use the Kawasaki Rideology app. Now we're sponsored at Quadlock here, so I'm used to mounting my phone on the bars, and typically that gives me the least buggy experience because some of these proprietary apps and systems can be a bit unreliable. But still, if you like the idea of having something very clean and integrated, then maybe you'll find this new feature quite appealing. As before, you've still got the two different versions of this bike. So you've got a base bike and then an SE model, which gets better brakes and suspension along with a USB-C port fitted as standard and a different finish, which we'll look at a little bit later. So while that bike has always had decent brakes ever since it came out a year or two back, the standard bike was looking a bit basic with some fairly old school looking axial calipers. And so perhaps it's good news for 2025 that it now gets radially mounted 4-pot calipers by Nissin on a pair of 300mm discs. Typically, radially mounted calipers are a bit more rigid than axially mounted calipers, and so it should give a firmer feel at the lever and a sense of crispness. The SE, on the other hand, still gets the Brembos along with the gold anodized fork and also the upgraded Öhlins S46 monoshock at the rear. Otherwise though, I don't think there are any major changes to the chassis. They don't mention any changes to the frame or the geometry, for example. But in terms of the whole package, I should point out there is a little bit of weight gain with a kilogram more for both the standard bike and the SE. That means the standard Z900 now comes in at 213 kilograms wet, whereas the SE model is 214. And so to be fair, that is still fairly light, and I think it's still acceptable for this kind of bike. Kawasaki have also sought to improve the comfort of the bikes with a new seat that firstly uses a revised shape that's said to be a bit flatter, so it allows you to shuffle around a bit more, but also it uses a thicker urethane padding that I guess should make it a bit more comfortable for those longer days in the saddle. Now, one potentially negative side effect of adding more padding to the seat is that it does lift the seat height from the previous generation's 820mm up to 830. Still, generally for someone of my height at 175 centimeters or around 5'9", 830mm is still generally easy enough to get on with, but if you are a little shorter than that and still like the look of this bike, then fear not, because there is a low saddle option that takes 20mm off that seat height, so that will bring it down to a much more amenable 810mm. Now on top of that, they've also fitted it with what they call a fat handlebar for the new model year, which they claim helps with rigidity, so maybe it gives a little bit more of a sense of precision to the handling. And they also say it creates more of a sense of pride and purpose, which seems like a bit of a stretch for a slightly chunkier handlebar. Still, onto the styling, and it isn't massively different to the previous generation. As you'd expect, it's a bit of a continuation, but what I will say is it looks a little bit more rounded off, like they've softened some of the edges. So look, although the overall silhouette is unmistakably a Z900, I think in the details I actually prefer this new version. Perhaps though it'll look a little bit less aggressive and therefore a bit less desirable to you, so let me know what you think down in the comments below. Specifically, I'm really liking the lighting with the slightly more compact look at the front end, but they've also gone for quite a bold design on the tail light, and I think that's where you can give a bike a bit of recognizability, and I think they've done that really nicely there. Onto the paint, and the base Z900 will be available in a pretty much blacked out version. Then there's one with red highlights on the frame, the bodywork and the rim tape. And then thirdly, there's a similar finish but swap the red out for a green. The SE for me is the pick of the bunch though, because it looks the most vibrant. It uses a similar finish, but the green kind of extends to the whole entirety of the wheel, not just the rim tape. And for me, it ties in really nicely with the green frame, but then it has to be said, the gold anodized fork and the yellow shock just give it a bit of vibrance, which I think is welcome. No prices on this one as of yet, but the 2024 bike started at £9,699 for the standard model, whereas the SE version came in at £11,299. Now, it's not a massive overhaul, so I don't think you can expect a huge price difference, but there are probably enough improvements, especially when it comes to the tech, to warrant a few hundred extra quid, especially when bike prices are generally just creeping up. I think the big problem now though has become the new Honda CB1000 Hornet, which will start at just £8,999, and it really just sets a new benchmark for naked bikes like this. At 150 horsepower, it's got a massive advantage on the spec sheet, and also the upgraded SP version, which you could say is equivalent to the SE of this one, well, that still comes in at under £10,000, and that's despite getting the better brakes and suspension. Still, you know, peak power is hardly the full picture, and so we'll have to wait till we can ride both bikes next year to find out which is truly the winner. But in the meantime, on first impressions, do let me know which you'd pick down in the comments below. Also, if you haven't seen my full rundown of the Hornet, then I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next one.